So we will be talking about memory, and specifically because of my research interest, and because Pablo, you're interested in it, we're talking about how aging is affecting memory. I will begin by talking a bit about what memory is. I think a lot of people when they think about memory, they will think of it as one thing. You either have your memory or you lose your memory. But actually, memory is a more complex concept than what we know. And to give you some idea about, what memory is, I can tell you that memory actually can be split down into three main components. In order for us to form memory, first of all, we need to go through the learning phase, or what we call memory encoding, right? So we need to listen to the piece of new information that we want to remember, or we read it, if it is presented to you visually, and try to learn it and encode it into your brain. So that's stage one. Stage two is storage, memory storage. So once you learn the piece of information, you want to keep it in your brain and in your mind so that later on when you need it, you can pull it out and use it. So if you think of your brain as a computer, it's like storing a piece of new information into the hard drive. And you will keep it for a period of time until you need to use it. So that's memory storage. That's the second phase. And the last phase, the stage three, is memory retrieval. So that's when you actually need that piece of information. You will search for your hard drive, you search for your brain library, and look for the right piece of information that you need to use it and pull it out. So that's the third stage: encoding, storage, and retrieval. And our memory can change throughout life in those three stages. So Pablo, when you say that you put your glasses somewhere and you forgot where you put it, that's probably a retrieval problem. You know where it is, you put it down, but you just at the moment you didn't pull out the location exactly right away. But usually, probably later on you will figure it out. And for some people, if they listen to, someone tell you a phone number and you listen to it and you couldn't remember it later on, it's probably not a problem of storage or retrieval, but it's encoding. You only listen it once, and a phone number have 9 digits. It's pretty, random string of number. If you hear it only once, maybe you fail to encode it. And those are actually pretty normal things that you might experience throughout life, and that may be normal and nothing to worry about. It become more concerning when the memory problem that occur is more consistent with what we see in patients who have dementia. So, for example, Alzheimer's disease is one of the kind of dementia that is most common as people get older. And for those patients, their memory problems is actually in the middle phase, storage. So they learn the information, no problem. They can repeat it to themselves and then they remember it. But their storage is not working well. So when the information comes in, it actually leaks out. It did not stay. So when it comes to time when you want to retrieve that piece of information, no matter how much more time you gave to them, they couldn't find it because it's not there anymore. It's lost. So that's a difference between pathological change in memory versus memory change that occur with aging. Memory changes that occur with aging is more associated with encoding and retrieval. So let's say if I ask you to remember 3 words now. So try to remember that. Lemon, tiger, jacket. Okay, so you listen to it, you try to remember it. If you want to enhance your encoding, you will repeat it to yourself, right? You will say lemon, tiger, jacket, and repeat it a few times, and then you will remember it. Or better still is you're going to write it down somewhere, and so when you need it, you can pull it out. So that kind of encoding period, as we get older, starting in our 30s, 40s, you will find that, it's harder for us to learn things. We really need to write down. We really need to rely on our notes, versus kids who are in their, 10 years old teens, or it may be easier for them to listen to it once and remember it. So that's actually pretty normal when you find yourself more reliant on notes. And then when you need to retrieve it, so let's say I asked you to, okay, so what were those 3 words? I asked you to remember. You may start to remember, okay, so lemon is one of them, and I don't remember the next two. But if I give you a cue or a hint, you may then able to retrieve it. So I can say, one of the word was actually an animal, and you will say, right, there's a tiger in there. And then one last word is a piece of clothing. It's either jacket or pants. And you go, oh, right, it's jacket. Now I remember. So that is also pretty normal. As we get older, we may need more reminders and hint for us to pull out information from our brain's memory storage. So again, if you think of yourself as a computer, you over time, when you accumulate more information, as we get older, into our 30s and 40s, we learn much more information and knowledge. So our hard drive is actually growing bigger and bigger. And when you get to your 60s, 70s, you have lived like 60 years, 70 years. You have a lot of major events in your life and things that happened in your life that you want to remember and is in your memory. So when it comes time to retrieve, it may be, take you a little bit longer to search throughout your hard drive to locate that exact piece of information that you need. And a cue or a hint may be helpful for you to go to the right spot and pick out that relevant piece of information. And it's different if the person is having dementia, because if you give them the hint, they couldn't locate that piece of information because it's not in the storage anymore. So that's kind of a brief overview about how memory changes as we get older and what is different between normal aging and people who are suffering from dementia. And right now, the kind of research that I'm looking at is pushing for looking at earliest cues of, when someone is suffering from some type of memory decline. And our program, the Memory and Aging Program, is also focusing on developing treatment or prevention strategy for people who are experiencing the earliest sign of memory change. And with that, I will be happy to take some question and then, have discuss it further with both of you, Victoria and Pablo.
Great, thank you very much. I do have a question. When I was a medical student, we evaluated a patient that had probably Alzheimer's. This was 40 years ago. And I was shocked by the difference between the short-term and the long-term memory. And we went through an exercise with this patient where, she could tell us her phone number from 40 years ago, but she couldn't tell us, not even a word that we just had told her just a minute ago, 5 minutes ago. How is it that short-term memory and long-term memory is so different?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's actually something that I hear a lot of time when I'm working with my patients as well. And, one thing that you can think of is, memory is like first in, last out. So earlier memory that, things that happened years ago, after all this year, it actually enter your long-term memory. It is in a safe place and, is not as easy to lose as short-term memory, things that you just learn. And another thing of thinking of it is also, you can think of what part of the brain is responsible for learning new information. Is the hippocampi or hippocampus is a structure that is deep inside our temporal lobe, deep inside our brain. And they are important for us to learn new information and form new memory. So when you're telling someone something right now and want them to form that new memory, they rely on that hippocampus to help to turn it into long-term memory. And if someone is having dementia, they actually, the first place that start to have problems is the temporal lobe, the hippocampus. That structure is starting to accumulate a protein fragment that we call amyloid plaques. And the volume of that structure shrink. So they have less ability to form new memories. And that's when you see that there are problems with short-term memory. They cannot learn new things. But the long-term memory is actually already in other part of the brain and is not affected until later stage of the disease. So they may have no problem telling you about what happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but they couldn't learn new things that happened just now.
And I will add, because learning and memory is my area actually at a more molecular level, but part of the reason that memories that are older are able to be kept is because every time you recall a memory, every time you retrieve, like Dr. Lee was saying, you strengthen it, right? And so the number of cells in your brain that are supporting this memory increases. And so the longer that memory is, and the more you've accessed it throughout your life, the more chance you have of preserving that memory, even if a couple of cells die that are involved in the engram, so to speak, of that particular memory.
Exactly. Thank you, Victoria. Absolutely.
We have some questions from the audience.
There's one question that I love. Are there any dietary supplements proven to slow memory loss?
Yeah, so that's actually something that everyone wants, right? You want to have a pill that you can take and then it will solve all the problems, right? So as with, all the supplement research, they are not medications. So it doesn't go through as much of, scientific testing to see how effective they are. And earlier there have been a lot of research that looks at fish oil and see how that may be helpful in, with memory. And then the support is actually not very strong after a more vigorous, study. But, nowadays there are more research that focus on different types of diet. So not necessarily supplements, but the type of diet. Like people who are following a more Mediterranean style diet, they may have a less likely to have memory decline as they get older. We don't completely understand all the mechanism yet, but we think that it actually has a lot to do with heart health. Whatever diet is good for your heart is actually good for your brain. As you can imagine, if your heart is working right, it pumped blood and that brings oxygen and nutrients to your brain and preserve your brain function. So that may be one possibility, one way that you may help to preserve your memory or brain function is by following a healthy diet.
So no supplements. There are a lot of questions about specific types of supplements, which we won't name them all, but as Dr. Lee said, in general, having a steady diet and a healthy diet is probably the best way to slow cognitive decline.
Absolutely.
How about exercise?
Absolutely. Exercise is excellent for your brain as well. Exercise is good for your heart health. That will be helpful for your brain health as well. As one of the trials that our center is right now running is called a US Pointer study. It's actually a name that we gave for a multi-domain intervention trial that focus on changing someone's exercise routine, their nutrients, their diet habit. They will be provided with some cognitive training. They will be provided regular advice on how to maintain their heart and health. And that intervention was adapted from a Finland trial. It's called finger trial. We call it pointer here in US, but it's actually a 2-year trial that helped and found that, after following a routine for exercise, brain training, and healthy diet, people actually have a slower decline of their cognitive ability over 2 years. And those people who join the study are people who are high risk. They have a lot of vascular problems like hypertension, diabetes, and other things. And we're replicating that here in Rhode Island as well. In US, we're one of the 5 sites running this study. And we are trying to figure out if that's actually helpful in US as well. So it's helpful in Finland, but does it work in US? And we're in the process of doing it. But in general, exercise definitely will be good. And it will be physical exercise, but also cognitive exercise, something that keep your brain active, learning something new, socializing, those are all good for memory as well.
And I know that you guys at Butler have been doing a lot of studies looking at people before they develop symptoms, trying to identify changes in the brain, physical changes, in addition to symptomatic changes that could predict, the risk of someone developing Alzheimer's. Could you tell us a little bit about that research? Because I found it so interesting when I heard it for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. We are the field is absolutely shifting to focus on prevention and finding people who we call in the prodromal stage. And that's actually, what does it mean? It means that someone is the person is already showing some changes in their brain, but they are not showing symptoms yet. So how do we find that out? So historically, Alzheimer's disease, the most common type of dementia, can only be diagnosed after someone died, based on autopsy, to look at the brain tissues to see if there's any amyloid plaque. But now there are new technology to allow us to examine the brain when the person is still living. And one specific types of brain scan is called amyloid PET scan. PET scan is kind of like your CT scan, something that you will do, in an emergency room. But this type of PET scan, we use a specific types of tracer that will bind to amyloid plaques. So it will travel to your brain, we will inject that, and then it travel to your brain. And when we take pictures of your brain, we will see the amyloid light up. So we can estimate how much amyloid is in someone's brain. And that can tell, the higher the amyloid level in the brain, the higher risk you may have in developing Alzheimer's or memory problems in the future. And that enable us to identify people who are showing some changes in the brain, the amyloid plaques accumulation. But when we test them, as neuropsychologists, when we test them, they are still having normal memory. And that kind of discrepancy gives us an window of opportunity to start prevention and start intervene earlier. And we are, in the middle of doing that kind of research. The PET scan is more intrusive. You need to do, some people doesn't like to be imaged, they have to stay in the room for half an hour, and you need to inject something into them. So we're trying to develop, new blood tests that is less invasive. We are developing digital cognitive testing that they can do on their phone, and trying different ways to help us to predict who is going to have a positive amyloid PET scan, and that will reduce the number of people needed to do that kind of invasive testing.
Great.
So I kind of wanted to go back to brain health, because in looking through the questions, there are a lot of them. I won't say them all specifically, but they all tend to be around health, right? What can we do to improve the health people, who were in early stages of dementia, or even who are in our younger years? So I think maybe that we kind of touched upon it already, right? We said exercise, we said diet. One thing I think we can add is our sleep, sleeping, and then also sociality, which in times of COVID has become quite difficult. So I wonder, Dr. Lee, if you have any insight as to how the lack of social interactions has been affecting people with early stages of dementia.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, especially over the last year. With patients that I'm seeing, a lot of patients was telling me that, family member coming in with their mom or dad who is experiencing memory decline, they have been saying that this is a particularly tough year because, usually my mom will, have some, girls' night out, or, going shopping with their girlfriends at least, once a week. My dad will go to the library and have coffee with his pals, and, that actually keep them going and actually keep them active. But without those, they seem to be, more decline. It seems like their memory are getting worse. And the reason being, as I said, physical activity is important, but cognitive activity is important as well. And socializing actually require a lot of your attention and brain power, right? You need to be able to focus on someone. You need to be able to process what the person is talking about. You need to be able to respond, and and without those, people tend to feel like they're declining in a more rapid pace. Another important piece is because socializing is very important for our mood. Without a lot of social interaction, if we are staying home a lot, I'm sure that all of you have experienced some of those moments where you feel really bored, you feel like there's nothing to looking forward to, and those affect our mood. When our mood is down, our memory efficiency also go down. We know that people who have depression, their memory problem can actually mimic dementia. We call it pseudo dementia. So I think that the lack of socialization definitely can take a toll on memory, especially for people who are experiencing some early signs of dementia. And so the key is, for family member to support them is to try to plan out some activity for them, make phone calls, try to visit in a social distant way. And hopefully, with everyone taking the vaccine, we can, resume some of the activities soon.
Yeah, definitely. And, I will add to that because, again, from the molecular perspective, I study learning and memory too, is that, sometimes we say that sleep is good for you, that exercise is good for you. And we kind of like, yeah, it's good for us. But it turns out that for all species, it is good for us. So even in rodent studies, if you put a rodent and house them by themselves, or even with only one other rodent, rodents are very, very sociable creatures. And then you take another group and you house them with 10 other rodents, and then you put them you give them a task, a cognitive task, and it turns out that the ones who were raised socially, or the ones who had more exercise, or the ones who had the healthier diet, or the ones who were allowed to sleep, will actually perform better on cognitive tests later in life, and it may even be protective of cognitive decline. So, if we see this even in the animal kingdom, we can be sure that they are biological mechanisms that are at play in our own health, definitely.
Absolutely, those recommendations all have scientific basis. It's not just that, okay, so you do that, and right?
Yeah, exactly. So I have some questions here. One from a middle schooler. If someone in the family has memory loss, is there a higher risk for other people in the family to have memory loss too?
That's a great question. So we know that memory loss or Alzheimer's disease have a genetic components to it. There are one specific type of Alzheimer's disease that is early onset. Usually, early to the point where the person may have an onset of memory loss in their 30s or 40s. Those types of families actually inherit a gene that is what we call dominantly expressive. So if those family members inherit the gene, they know that they're going to start to have dementia, around the same age as their family do. But that's a very rare type of Alzheimer's disease. It only affects about 1 or 2% of people who have dementia. For the rest of the, more common kind of dementia, the way it linked with genetic is not as one-to-one. There are certain genes that we know are risk gene. So for someone who, their grandparents had dementia, they may have a little higher risk of developing dementia, but it doesn't mean that they will definitely develop dementia. For example, for myself, my grandparents on my mother's side, both grandmother and father, they have dementia. And on my father's side, there's one grandparent, my grandfather, who had dementia. I know that I'm at risk, but I don't know for sure if I'm going to develop the disease. So it's higher, but not absolute. And there's also some genes that we know are related to Alzheimer's. One of them is called the apolipoprotein E, ApoE gene. We know that a particular kind of the ApoE gene, the E4 type, is associated with higher risk of Alzheimer's disease. So anyone who is a carrier of that E4 gene, they may have a higher risk. But even if the person have 1 copy or 2 copy of the E4 genes, it's just saying that they are having a relatively higher risk. So let's say if the general population, they have about 15% chance of getting dementia. people who have one copy of the E4 gene, they may have 25% chance. If the person have two copies of the E4 genes, they may be increased to 40, 50% chance of developing Alzheimer's disease in their lifetime, but it's still not 100%. So to capture that, definitely with family history, it increases your risk, but it's not absolute. There are still many other factors that are changeable that you can work on, like good sleep, exercise, and good diet that can help mitigate those risks.
You have another question. She says, memory loss issue happen often in Asian people, Hong Kong, Singapore, when compared to US people.
So the question is it more common or less common?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a great question. That's touch on the one of the piece that I'm very interested in is there any racial ethnic difference in terms of memory loss, and I think cultural beliefs also play into that as well. So based on what I know, based on research, Asian countries like Chinese, Hong Kong, Singapore, or other people of Asian descent, there is a higher risk for them to develop strokes because of the cardiovascular risk. And stroke can cause dementia as well, and it can cause memory loss. So it's more often that you see people of Asian descent to have stroke-related dementia rather than Alzheimer's, compared to people who have who are white or who are Black, African American. And are they more likely to experience memory loss? That's actually a complicated question because in order to understand whether those people are having more memory problems, you need to be able to find a way for people to report it. And what we found is that some cultural beliefs about aging actually may reduce the likelihood that someone say that I'm having memory problems. So let's say my grandma may say that, okay, I'm not remembering things as well. And my mother say, okay, yep, so this is expected. Your grandma is getting older, that's acceptable, and I'm helping her. So it's not a problem. Versus, someone from a different culture who are more used to, knowing more about dementia and Alzheimer's, they may think that, okay, so this memory loss is not right. I should go see a doctor. So that may be one of the reasons why there is a less percentage of report of memory problems in Asian countries versus people, in the US. But that may be a cultural difference rather than a biological difference.
Right. Are we at time?
We are at time, yes. So I'd like to thank Dr. Lee for her presentation today. We have committed to memory, and we will never forget it.